Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a non-traditional legal program with your host and trusted advisor, Liz Myska, your guide through the web of life's dilemmas.
Welcome to another edition of Connecting the Dots. I'm your host, Liz Myska. And today I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Deb Hall, the new Executive Director or CEO of the YWCA of Central Massachusetts. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
I want to talk about how you became the Executive Director. I was a member of the YW for basically from 2008 when I started losing my sight until 2020, January 2020, before COVID hit. And I was a board member. I was on the nominating committee. And what always impressed me was the community building, the camaraderie, particularly amongst women that, again, I don't think I necessarily would have met. And I'm just wondering about, your reflection on that.
YWCA, our mission statement pretty much says that eliminating racism and empowering women. So it's a unique place where women come, where women who are leaders come, where women who are interested in taking on leadership roles come, where we offer mentoring in many different ways and programming that's empowering to women. My road to this position in this moment in time, I would say is interesting. You set off on a certain path in life, right? And you don't know necessarily, you may have an idea of where you want to go, but how you get there sometimes, is not a straight road. It's not from point A to point B. But definitely I grew up in a household where service was important, and service to humanity and helping other people who were not as fortunate necessarily. That's just what we were taught growing up, and that led into a life of course, volunteerism that I engaged in early on in my life as a youngster, but also then in high school and then in college. And from there, decided I wanted to concentrate on work in the area of social justice, equity, and definitely women's rights. And so I was in college during the time when Nelson Mandela was still imprisoned. And so that was at the forefront of my mind and really an awakening for me. And throughout my college experience, again, continuing to volunteer, I think that's really helpful when people think, I'm going down this path, I'm in class, I'm reading about it, but I think you really have to get in there and do it and get the experience. And from there, I found myself graduating and working in nonprofits and just enjoying the work and moving up the ladder slowly but surely, and decided, I'm going to go back and get a graduate degree. It led me here in different ways. I'm not from Worcester, Massachusetts either, but I moved here a few years ago and just really wanted to become involved in the community because I knew I'd be living here. And so I immediately kind of reached out to Linda Cavioli because her name, it's like, if you want to do anything in the nonprofit world, you need to meet Linda Cavioli. And we met and had a wonderful conversation. I later served as on the board of directors, and then was then recruited when there was a transition out of the domestic violence department to come on board and serve as director of that. And then this position came open, and it was just a natural next step for me.
When you were talking about volunteering, I'm just curious, back in your youth, what types of things did you volunteer for?
Right. So my mom and dad had a prison ministry when we were young. I have 6 brothers. I'm an only girl, only female in the family, outside of my mother, obviously. But they had a prison ministry, and so they worked with women specifically who were incarcerated for many different reasons. What I now know of, they were there for maybe defending themselves against their abuser, or they were trafficked, what we call trafficking now. All of these things make sense. As a precocious child, I would just sit with my mom while she was doing what we now call case management services, but really she was just listening. And so every weekend, that's kind of how we spent our time. We were small, so mom and dad would take us in the car, and I just would play There was a playground we would play, but it started there, and then I went on to like literacy work, right? Things that make sense, reading to younger kids in the library, and then I found myself in high school and at college doing work with domestic violence survivors, and moved on, did some more literacy work. Did some substance abuse work. So it was just necessary and important to me to do something every year. Normally my volunteer activities, they required a year. I eventually did CASA. They required, that was probably the most intense, court-appointed special advocate program. And they're all a little different, but I remember having a family of 6 children who had lost their mom. She had passed away, and they just wanted to be together. It was probably some of the hardest volunteer work I've ever done with families, but I just made it a point to say every year I have to volunteer somewhere, somehow, whether it was a food pantry, but most of them were long-term volunteer commitments, so they were varied.
And sounds like very powerful, that from a very young age you were being exposed to real life.
Real life.
Not, you weren't
Real life.
Putting stamps on envelopes and putting flyers.
Right.
You were seeing people at a breaking point.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
So did that impact the type of degree that you sought in undergrad or in graduate school?
So yes, and the degree I sought in undergrad, I majored in political science because I thought I'd go to law school. Then I met this wonderful professor who is still a mentor of mine at Washington University. I won't mention his name, but he said, "Debbie, don't waste your time being a lawyer. You're too creative. Hey, being an English lit teacher." And I loved him and respected him, and I understood what he's saying. Hey, there may be something else out there for you, or maybe you haven't found your way. So I took a pre-law class, a constitutional law class, and said, I don't want to learn to think that way. It wasn't for me. But initially, it definitely was a way that I saw I could help change a system that was inequitable, that wasn't just for certain groups of people. And so some of my best friends are attorneys, so I don't want to offend any attorneys, but it wasn't for me. And that day, he's like, "Oh, Debbie, don't waste your talents on that." I said, "Oh, okay, professor." So found out later he also had a law degree, but he ended up being an English professor, a literature professor. So I kind of thought about that. So it was political science and African American studies, actually. It was a double major in undergrad. And then I went back to graduate school, when I was a little bit older. And at that time, I had been working in nonprofits for some time. And so I said, I have all of the experience, but let me kind of formalize this in terms of a graduate degree if I'm going to move forward in this field. So it ended up being nonprofit management.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I was a history and political science major.
Oh, wow.
And dual major.
Yeah.
And there are no lawyers in my family, but I won't burden you with that whole story. But I knew from a very young age I wanted to be a lawyer. And when I remember going in to see my advisor in college, my history advisor, and I just figured, let me just toy with something else. And he says, well, you could teach or you can go to law school. Basically, those are your two. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna go to law school.
Right.
But again, a liberal arts education, which I think is so important, where you are being exposed, to a variety of arts and. Because I am definitely not a math and science person.
That wasn't me either.
Yeah, okay.
That wasn't me either.
We're definitely simpatico in that way. Okay, all right, definitely. But interestingly, and again, you struck a chord. I just read an article in the American Bar Association Journal about an African American woman, a young lawyer, who said, people say to her, "You don't look like a lawyer." So the whole article was about people's perceptions of what, quote unquote, a lawyer looks like or what a lawyer does. And it's so easy to fall into those traps. And again, the bias, the inequities, the lack of justice.
And it's not much different, I would say, even being the CEO of a nonprofit. So if you meet me and you may meet someone else, and you don't automatically assume I'm the CEO of that nonprofit. So I think it works across, definitely different vocations, different professions that, for whatever reason, maybe I'm not what you perceive to be someone who's actually leading an organization. So I hear that, and definitely for Black women, right, women of color, specifically, that, there's a perception out there that you're constantly finding yourself trying to make sure people understand that, we too can be in certain positions. And we still in 2022 are dealing with that. And I remind people, I did transition where our organization in central Massachusetts, the YWCA, is 136 years old. I am the first woman of color to lead that organization. And we have a mission of eliminating racism and empowering women. So first, but definitely not the last.
I'm wondering, what did you think it was going to be like to be? Did you have qualms about your own abilities to do this job? I think just because of the legacy of your predecessor.
Absolutely. Anybody coming in, and I made that clear when I was interviewing, anyone coming into this role, following, this community icon, Linda Travioli. She really is. 29 years you're in this position. It was going to be difficult. I think we, and Linda, she's a friend and a mentor, and we had at least a couple of months together to kind of transition me into the role. And so it was very helpful. You don't always have the privilege of having your predecessor kind of helping you transition. And so we talked about it early on, and we both agreed, and this was very helpful, that, people were like, how are you going to fill Linda's shoes? And I said, well, hey, first of all, we don't wear the same size. I'm not really trying to, she's a little bitty thing. I'm not really trying to fill her shoes, but that's not the point. And what we would say together, no, she's going to take it from here. She said, Debbie, I've done what I needed to do. Right. Now it's your turn. And so with that narrative we were both putting out, it has been helpful to kind of at least help me get started and situated. And so I think the board of directors, definitely the staff, everyone has been great about the transition. And I'm not Linda. There will be moments where I have to remind, I'm not Linda. But it's okay, that's natural. 29 years doesn't just go away. Right. So hopefully we are building on that legacy and moving the organization forward, and the time was right to do that. And then there's, some days I still wake up, I'm like, oh, am I the executive director? Back the first couple of weeks, it's like, well, Debbie, sign this, or somebody has to make a decision. I was like, oh, I'm the one making the decision. Who's going to make the decision? You are, Debbie. Along with, obviously, senior leadership team and in a more collaborative way. But there were those moments, particularly at the beginning, I'm just walking, I'm like, what do I do? Like, what do you, and knowing that you're prepared, but still having what I consider just a general a healthy anxiety around it. You want to do well, but I also knew from my experience that Linda didn't know what she knew 29 years before. Like you start where you are, and then you just learn, and you're open to learning. And so I'm open to that, and open to making mistakes, and saying I don't have a problem apologizing to people. But everyone's been extremely supportive in the community, and like I said, the board and staff. So it's been easier than I anticipated with the transition.
You've been falling forward as opposed to...
I like that.
Yes,
I like that.
Well, you made me think about... you took over, at the conclusion of renovation during COVID. I mean, so really the stakes for you, were high, I guess. Yeah, we're very high. You're right, very
you
high.
finish the renovation, there's the ribbon cutting, and then there's all this financing that's not quite completed yet.
Exactly.
And
like,
all of these things you're
surprise!
walking into that Linda's been doing for 5 years. I'm like, oh, I got to learn all this quickly, but also COVID. And COVID was difficult. We were doing the renovation. It was completed on time when COVID hit during 2020, which was difficult. But I am saying we will see, COVID continues to affect us, and I think we're even in a more challenging position now in terms of staff. We've all heard about the great resignation and people just being COVID exhausted, and surely most of us thought, maybe it wouldn't be totally gone, but we would be, able to live and exist in a different way by now, in a more what we consider normal pre-COVID way. That is not the case. And so, you're inheriting, people were able to work remotely during, the last year and a half. And so as you're trying to bring people back, you are trying to pay attention. Folks are used to working from home, and so maybe we want to do this. And how does the world of work look different? Right. So there's some different things that all nonprofit and just leaders of organizations are facing, whether they're for-profit or not. Leaders of organizations are facing now that we still are just working through. Mental health amongst not just participants, but definitely our employees. So,
well, again, I think people's habits had to change. Their habits had to change because everything was, everything was put into, into a maelstrom, and we were all floundering, and
exactly.
we were in that sea of anxiety and uncertainty, but isn't life that? In general, I mean, even if we do not admit to it, it is right. That. Unbelievably, Deb, our time together has evaporated.
Wow!
I know, really.
Wow!
And I feel like we just got started.
I agree.
What do you hope at the end of 2022 that you can look back and say, I've accomplished this in my first full year as CEO?
I think, it was different when I started. Let me say it's changed over even these last few months. And really what I hope I have accomplished along with the senior leadership team is that we paid attention. We took the time to think about what kind of culture we wanted to create at YW during this COVID period. Still, I hope that employees feel appreciated. I hope that we are able, and I know we are, continuing to serve participants uninterrupted. But I tell people, the organization is the organization because of the employees you have, because of the people who work there. And it's so important for us to take care of them as we continue to grow programs. Now, all of this is happening during COVID, but people are important to me, and that's all the people, and that's people who work there and come in every day, people who were flexible, people who talked to survivors, people who made sure frontline workers' children had a place to go, to be cared for, and that we were able to keep a pool open because the swimmers want to swim, right? They love to swim.
I know.
So I hope that, and I hope that, along the way, as I mentioned earlier, the new title was CEO, not to be braggadocious or to make me feel, like, oh, I'm a CEO versus an ED. But along with my title change came the title change of all of senior leadership. And I think that was important for women in a women-led organization in a nonprofit world where you see mostly men who are presidents and CEOs, and women tend to be executive directors. These are little things, but they're big things. They really are. And it's just a way of changing how we are operating in the world of work and how women operate, and continuing to look at inequities and commissions and boards and the lack of representation there. So I hope to say that we not only survive this period of time and this transition, it's huge, the renovation, Linda transitioning out, that the staff has stayed in place and felt appreciated. and that we'll survive this for sure, and we'll thrive after this. So
Well,
hopefully that's
137 years, right? It was, as of this year?
yes.
Okay, well,
Here we go.
here we go, here we go, here we go. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I really enjoyed this and really enjoyed getting to know you better.
Wonderful. This was such a pleasure and a wonderful moment in my day. So Thank you so much, Liz, for having me. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
Join me the next time for another edition of Connecting the Dots.
Please note that the information provided in this show is not a substitute for consulting with an experienced local attorney and receiving counsel based on the facts and circumstances of a particular transaction. To contact Lizbeth, email her at lizbeth@elizabethlmyska.com or call her office at 508-753-7681. We're online at connectingthedots.lawyer. Executive producers, Lizbeth Myska and Jack Peacock. Producers, John Medberry and Bill Hamilton. A production of Elizabeth L. Myska, J.D., LLM, in association with Compliments.
Substance Use Helpline, Kathy speaking. May I help you?
The Substance Use Helpline is basically this incredible resource for people to find treatment and to find treatment based on what their situation is.
Tools like the helpline are so fundamental in this movement. We need to get the word out there that there's help here, there's hope here.
We're here to support, help, refer, whatever we can do, just give us a call.
They can call the Substance Use Helpline and get that explained to them, what their options are, what they can do, and let them know that there's hope.
There's as many ways to recover as there are people in recovery, and I think that's a really important thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Not everybody needs to have a detox. Not everybody needs to go inpatient.
Llámenlo, que son real, no es una computadora y te van a ayudar en lo mejor que pueden y no te vas a sentir solo. Ellos sí se sienten que están ahí contigo. Han pasado lo mismo que tú y yo. Llámenlo.
Es bien importante que usted llamó hoy, entonces este es el primer paso para su recuperación.
If you have a family member or a friend who's in recovery and you are going through that trauma, which is a different type of trauma, but is absolutely a very hard and difficult, terrible thing to go through, and to see your loved one go through, you can call the helpline and they will connect you with resources that'll bring you some relief.
Love the skin you're in. Love yourself no matter what.
You can do this. Anybody can do this. Reach out and get the help that you need. Get the tools that you need to develop your recovery. Like when you don't feel like there's hope, this is where it is. It's right here. It's free. Come and get it.
I'm really glad you called this morning. Well, I know it's not easy sometimes to pick up that phone, and so it takes a lot of courage. I'm really glad to hear from you.
Life has something better in store for you, but you have to keep your hope alive and you have to believe. You're still worthy. You know, you still can turn your life around.
I'm so glad you called.
In uncertain times, what can you be sure about? The sun rises in the east. What goes up must come down. Night follows day. Well, here's something else. When it comes to dealing with debt collectors, federal law gives you rights. For example, debt collectors can't call before 8 in the morning nor after 9 at night. Can't curse or insult you. Can't demand that you pay more than you owe. Can't lie about anything. They can't say that papers they send you are legal forms if they're not. nor can they make up consequences for not paying your debt. And they can't call you at work if your employer doesn't allow it. You also have the right to stop debt collectors from calling you. How do you do that? You have to notify them in writing. Sending them a letter should stop the phone calls, but of course, it doesn't wipe out your debt. There's helpful information about dealing with debt at ftc.gov/moneymatters, a website from the Federal Trade Commission. It explains the rules of behavior for debt collectors. Take a look. There are some that may surprise you. If your debts have gone into collection, remember that you have rights. Asserting your rights doesn't make your debt go away, but it does give you a voice. The more you know about how to manage your debt and deal with debt collectors, the better off you can be. After all, money matters. If you think that a debt collector has violated the law, report it. File your complaint with the Federal Trade Commission at ftc.gov/complaint. Your complaint gives law enforcement a lead to follow up on and may stop it from happening to someone else. The Federal Trade Commission is the nation's consumer protection agency. For more tips on credit and debt, visit ftc.gov/moneymatters or 1-877-FTC-HELP. 1-877-382-4357.